You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Podcast where you get a masterclass in child-centered play therapy and practical support and application for your work with children and their families. In today's episode, I am answering a question from Jess in Florida, another fellow Floridian, and interestingly, she's in the Tampa area, which is right where I am. So, Jess, I'm so glad that you reached out. Thank you. And her question is about a child wanting to take something from the playroom. And I've covered questions along this line before, but not this specific situation, which was not specifically that he was trying to take it, which we've talked about, but this was that it ended up pushing the session so much longer, and there was another child waiting in the waiting room, and then this child refused to leave the playroom once he put the toy back. So kind of some complicated layers of a child wanting to take something home. So we're going to dive into that. Before we do, I mentioned yesterday that we are going to do a live event. I have some further details for you. If you go to playtherapypodcast.com/live, LIVE, you will be able to register for the event. The requirement is that you have to have a Zoom account. So please be mindful, if you do not have a Zoom account, you will not be able to register, and that's easy to establish one. So if you don't, just go ahead and create a Zoom account, then you can register playtherapypodcast.com/live, and you'll be able to secure your spot. And the way that that will work is I will do an actual podcast episode. So I will talk for the first 10-ish minutes. I know it's not always around 10 minutes, but whatever that happens to be, we'll talk, and then I'll open it up to live Q&A. And for those of you who are not coaching participants and not collective members, I want to let you know I am reserving the Q&A for podcast listeners specifically. So if you are not a collective member and you are not a coaching participant, you will have the floor for Q&A on this live event. So please make sure that you RSVP for that. I'm really looking forward to having you there January 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. All right, so let me read parts of Jess's email, and then we'll dive in and we'll talk about this together. Hi, I hope this email finds you well. I've been listening to both of your podcasts for a while and find them so helpful. I also work in the Tampa area, so it was wild for me to learn that your practice is close. I was a second and third grade teacher while I was working on my master's degree, and your podcast has helped me unlearn a lot of ways that I choose to interact with children, both in the therapy setting and in my daily life. And I'm going to pause there for a second because so many of you are former school people. So your guidance counselors, your teachers, your daycare workers, many of you have backgrounds in child education. And it makes me so genuinely happy and content to know that CCPT has changed your lives and that you have learned a different way to be with children. And so for all of you ex-school people, I want you to know I have a very special place in my heart for you all. And I'm so grateful that you saw that CCPT was a more effective, more appropriate way to interact and that you came in this direction. So really happy for you, Jess, that the podcast was kind of able to decondition some of the school stuff. Okay, I'll continue. I've recently started play therapy with a firstborn 7-year-old who is described by his parents to have ODD. No. He's very combative and often throws temper tantrums when he does not get his way. The first few sessions in the playroom have gone well, but this week I was met with a challenge. While we were finishing our session, I noticed that he was trying to sneak a small toy Lego treasure chest and take it home with him. I first stated, "You really like that treasure chest, but the play therapy Legos are not for taking home." He then tried multiple times to pretend that he was putting it in the Lego storage bin, but was still holding on to it. I then switched to, "If you choose not to put the toy away, then you choose not to play with the Legos next week." This was a very hard choice for him, and due to this situation, our session went way over the 50-minute allotted time. He did end up putting the toy back, but then curled himself into a ball on the floor and refused to come with me to the lobby. I was not sure what to do at that point, and because I had another client waiting, I ended up going to get his mother, who came in, scratched his back, and proceeded to carry him out of the room. I'm wondering for the future how I could have handled this situation better or differently. Thank you for the help, and again, for all of the free resources you provide to help the mental health worker population. Okay, Jess, well, thank you so much for the email, and thanks for giving us the details of the aftermath of limit setting, and we'll talk through this. So for those of you that might be new to the podcast, first, hello. So glad to have you. Happy that you're here. Happy that you found your people. And if you have not gone in order, I would really encourage and recommend that you start at episode 1 and go through, because there's a chronology and a teaching that goes through the podcast. So if you're on this episode and you've not been at the 1 through 200 and whatever, please go back and do that. It will really make a huge difference. By the way, this is a related aside. We are almost encroaching on the 450,000 download mark. And I know, I'm saying this because this is noteworthy. I know it was not so long ago that I announced we were close to the 300,000. And it has almost been 150,000 downloads in a really, really short amount of time. So you all just blow me away. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this podcast. It's incredible to me that the passion and the hunger and the desire to learn CCPT is just taking over the world, and it just makes my heart happy. So I wanted to celebrate that with you, because Eric mentioned to me a couple days ago, we're coming up on the 450,000. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell them. So anyway, please go back and listen in order, and you can binge listen. Many people email me and say that's what they've been doing. And I think this is nutso, but apparently a lot of you put me on quicker time. So you put me on like 1.5 or 1.75. I think a couple of you really brave, crazy people put me on 2.0. So although it makes me sound like a chipmunk, I don't know how you handle the speed of that. But anyway, if you want to catch up, you can speed me up. I don't know how I think about that, but whatever. All right. So let's dive into this question. So Jess, you mentioned that. Actually, I'm going to unpack a little bit of these details before I get into the answer, because this is noteworthy. Okay, 7-year-old described to have ODD, not a chance in this world, respectfully and lovingly. The description of he's combative and throws temper tantrums, that's dysregulation. That's lack of emotional vocabulary. That's lack of self-control. And at this point, he has been conditioned that if he escalates, he gets his way. There is nothing oppositional or defiant about that. It's a conditioned response because of dysregulation and doesn't possess emotional vocabulary and self-control. So let's get the diagnosis out of the way, because it's not warranted. And the fact that the first few sessions, as you said, went well, that's the honeymoon phase, and that's the warm up and the initiation. And we know that we typically see the best out of kids in the early few weeks, but we also know that they can't mask their junk forever. So then when you're at this point where he really wants the chest, that is a very standard part of the process. So those were my thoughts leading up to the taking of the Lego. All right. So he was trying to sneak the toy chest and take it home with him. So you said, I first stated you really like that chest, but the play therapy Legos are not for taking home. All right. Helpful pseudo limit. And what I mean by pseudo, for those of you that may not know my lingo, is you didn't go through full ACT. You did the A and the C, and you waited to see if he was able or willing to comply. All right. Now, I'm only going to tweak one piece of the limit. You said the play therapy Legos are not for taking home. That is true and appropriate, and it's not deviant from the model. But I'm going to broaden it a little bit, because the play therapy Legos are not for taking home. First of all, we don't need to say the word play therapy. A child doesn't need to know that it's play therapy. If they do, so be it. But we don't need to refer to anything about what we're doing as play therapy. It's just they get to come and play with us. So I would eliminate the play therapy phrase out of that in general. And at that point, it would be, but the Legos are not for taking home. However, I'm going to broaden this again. If we are specific in our limit and say the Legos are not for taking home, then the next week the child might try to take home coins. I had to think about something they would try to put in their pocket. Coins, or a marker, or a dart, or a magnet rock, or whatever. So when we set limits, we have to be thoughtful about what is the broadest context of the limit, which in this case, it would be the toys are not for taking home. So you really like that treasure chest, but the toys are not for taking home. That would be to follow your phrasing. I would actually say, you really like that treasure chest, but all of the toys are for staying in the playroom. That's the way I would phrase that. Because remember, when we set limits, it's A is not for B or X is for Y. So you chose A is not for B. The play therapy Legos are not for taking home. X is for Y is the way I would phrase it. All the toys are for staying in the playroom. Just a different way to say it, but I think by not using the not, by keeping it in the positive frame, I think it makes it a little bit more palatable. All the toys are for staying here. That's just the gentler way to say it, in my opinion. However, Jess, what you said was not off track with the tweaks. So the toys are not for taking home would be appropriate, but I would just flip it to the positive. Okay, so that was on target. So then it says, then he tried multiple times to pretend that he was putting it into the storage bin, but was still holding on to it. Okay, you didn't give us any insight into how you addressed that, but let's walk through that part. So you are going to reflect and you're going to acknowledge. So, you really wish that you could take that, but you know the toys are for staying here. And you're acting like you're putting it in the bin, but it looks like you still have it in your hand. And again, I have no frame of reference for what you actually said, but it's really helpful to continue to validate feelings and then continue to track behavior and acknowledge what you see happening. And notice that it's done without judgment. So it's just, it looks like you're pretending to put it back, but you might still have it in your hand. It's gentle, it's loving, it's patient. And here's something, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn and then come back. We have to be mindful of a few things in this scenario. First of all, the goal is that the child self-controls. That's the goal. The ultimate goal of limit setting is the child chooses to comply and is able to self-control. And sometimes that takes a while. And sometimes they have to really wrestle with that. So we're not trying to speed it up. We're not trying to force it. We're not trying to coerce or bribe or negotiate. We're waiting for the child to choose to comply, and we're waiting for the child to self-control. Also, we know that a child sometimes needs upwards of 60 seconds to process a choice. So when we watch a child wrestling with a limit that has been given and a choice and an enforcement choice that we've provided, we have to sometimes give them time and space. They sometimes need 60 seconds to process this. So it does become a slow process, and we can't expect it to go quickly. Their brains don't think. They don't cognitively address these things. They are in their feelings. So all he feels is he wants the Lego treasure chest. And so to force him to think through the choice is very hard, and it takes a while. And then finally, because of that, we have to be patient. When we set limits, we have to have a lot of patience. My mother-in-law, I'll tell a really quick related story. My mother-in-law lived with us for a little while before our house was built, and our son was pretty young at the time. And I've only ever raised my son in CCPT fashion. He's only ever known child-centered play therapy as a parenting approach. And she would watch and listen to me give choices, and she would watch and listen to me provide limits. And I would just calmly, consistently reiterate the choice again and again and again. And I would consistently state the limit again and again and again. And one day she looked at me and she said, "Brenna, you have the patience of Job." And for those of you that may not know that Bible story, it's a reference to someone who really, really, really suffered for a long time. And she was referencing that she felt like it was just absolute suffering and misery to wait out our son being able to comply with choices and limits. And that I've never forgotten that. And I find that funny because I don't feel like I'm especially patient. I don't feel like that's especially taxing or difficult to just wait for a child to choose, to wait for a child to comply. I think that that's the ideal scenario. I don't feel angry that I have to wait for it. I just wait for it because I know that it's a part of the process. So anyway, that was a side story that was related. But these are the things we have to keep in mind. The goal is that the child self-controls, the child chooses to comply. We have to sometimes give them 60 seconds every time we do it. We have to be really patient. And then number 4, you give a limit 3 times. So we're going to go through that process 3 times before we jump to ultimate limit, because we need to be assured that the child is unwilling or unable to comply with the limit, and they need to be given the opportunity 3 times. So now that we've talked through all that, he was given the ultimate limit. I don't know if you did the A and the C before you jumped to that, but you said if you choose not to put the toy away, then you choose not to play with the Legos next week. Okay. So here's my tweak for that. Every play session is a new day, and nothing carries over. So you can do an ultimate choice where they choose not to play with the toy for that play session. So the child continues to hit you with the nunchucks, and after 3 rounds of it, you move to ultimate limit and you say, if you choose to play with the nunchucks and not hurt me, you choose to continue to play with them. But if you choose to hurt me with the nunchucks, you choose not to play with them for the rest of our time today. Which do you choose? That's appropriate because it's related to that specific play session. Nothing carries over to the following play session. So we would never want a whole week to go by and then have them come in and not be able to play with Legos the following week. It's a clean slate every single time they walk into the playroom. So that would not be part of the ultimate limit. And I would argue that you wouldn't want to put the ultimate limit parameters around the Legos. I would argue you would want to put the ultimate parameters around leaving the playroom. So here's what I mean by that. You really don't want to put the treasure chest back, but you know all the toys are for staying here. And our time is up for today. So there's kind of 2 expectations here. Not only does the chest remain, but we need to leave, right? So, and our time is up for today would be probably added on to that limit. If you had to move to ultimate limits, I would say, if you choose to give me the chest, you choose to hop down the hallway to go see mom. If you choose to not give me the chest, you choose to hop down the hallway to go see mom, and then you choose to give her the chest in the lobby. Which do you choose? See how now it's about getting out of the room, going out, but the expectation is if you choose not to put it in the room, you're still going to give it back. So you can choose to give it to me, or you can choose to give it to mom. Another option is, if you choose to leave it in the playroom, you choose to have time to get a snack, for example. If you choose to take it with you, you choose not to have snack and you choose to give it to mom in the lobby. Which do you choose? So our ultimate limit is really about getting out of the room and making sure the Lego is put back. Because here's what happens. In your scenario, Jess, if you choose not to put the toy away, then you choose not to play with Legos next week. You want to know how that can be interpreted? Okay, good. I get to keep the treasure chest and then I won't play with them next week. Who cares? And then guess what? When he finally 2 weeks down the road gets to play with Legos again, then he takes 6 Lego pieces and goes, I just won't play with them next week. Means to an end for a child. So we don't ever want to get ourselves stuck where we end up getting bitten in the butt by the way that we phrased a limit. And the goal is always that the Lego remains in your office. It doesn't have to stay in the playroom necessarily, but it remains in the office. So I hope that that's helpful. And then finally, when he finally put it back Huge moment of celebration. Huge. Now, we don't react. We don't know, or we don't let them know, rather, that we're celebrating, but we're doing internal cartwheels, right? So child chose to self-control. Child chose to comply. He was obedient and he was able to self-regulate. Monumental moment. However, it took everything in him. So he fell apart. Now, this is a kid who supposedly has ODD. I'm air quoting. And then also is known to have tantrums and combative. All he did was curl himself up in a ball. That's also self-regulation. That's also self-control. Huge win. So all of that is something to celebrate. However, now he's curled up in a ball and won't leave. He's just overwhelmed. That was really, really hard. We go right back to reflecting. Oh, that was a really hard choice. And you chose to put it back so you could have Legos next week, but you're really upset. You really wish that you could take that home. Oh, you're choosing not to leave because you just don't feel like you're ready to go yet. We just go right back into reflection and acknowledging. Now, Jess, you said there was someone waiting for you, another client waiting, and you weren't sure what to do. I will help you so you know what to do. And we've all been there. You sit down and you rub his back, or you touch his shoulder, or you put your hand on the back of his head. If he lets you, if he shrugs off and goes, don't touch me, then you know he can't receive affection. But you sit down and you physically touch the child and you continue to say all of the validating, understanding, I'm here, I hear you, I understand, I care, and I delight in you things. And you gently say, oh, you're really upset and you really didn't want to have to put that back, but our time's up and it's time to go out and see mom. And you just constantly remind him that time is up and it's time to go see mom. And he will eventually also choose. See, this is basically a pseudo limit. He's now going to choose to get up and go out to the lobby. Might it take a little bit? Sure. And here's the thing. Don't ever, and I don't really give imperatives or mandates, but this is to all of you. Don't ever feel like you have pressure to do something because there's another kid waiting. Don't ever put that pressure on yourself. You want to know what's going to happen? You're going to finish doing whatever you need to do with that child, and they're going to leave, and you're going to immediately look at the parent and the child that have been waiting for you, and you're going to say, I'm sorry, I know that I ran over. I really appreciate your patience. We were dealing with some pretty deep stuff at the end of that, and I couldn't rush it. And guess what they're going to say? I completely understand. It's okay. And then you still give that child the full time. I've had people leave in reviews for me before that they appreciate the fact that I give extra time if a kid needs it. Parents have put that in reviews. I didn't ask them to. It's just something that they valued. We don't ever have to rush something because you know what? They would want the same for their own kid. If that was their kid struggling, they would want us to give that child time to work through that and time to go through the therapeutic process. So you just acknowledge why you're late, you apologize, and you thank them for their grace and their patience. And there is never an issue with going back late. So please be really aware that you don't have to feel pressure to rush out there. And my final thought, when we set limits about taking things home or wanting to have stuff outside of the playroom, a really helpful phrase to throw in there is, you can play with it again next time. So as part of the whole ACT process, oh, you really like that treasure chest and you wish you could take it home, but you know all the toys are for staying here, but you can play with it again next time. Now, one of the choices can sometimes be you can choose where to put it. So you can choose to hide it in the room and see if it's there when you come back, or you can choose to put it in a secret spot and then you can check to see if it's there next time. Which do you choose? Notice that there's all kinds of ways to give choices that are not in the way that we think. The goal is just that the child chooses to leave it. So it can be where they want it to stay, where they want to hide it, where they want to see if no one else will even know it's there. There's all kinds of ways that we can add that in. But either way, we want to also say, and you can play with it again next time. It'll be here. Now the why matters, hashtag. So here's something else you need to sometimes throw out there. The why that the toys are not for taking from the playroom. The why that all the toys are for staying here. So that every time you come, all the toys are for you and everyone else to play with. They would never want to have a favorite toy that another kid took home and then they come in and they don't get to play with it. That's not fair. Every kid has a sense of fairness and justice. So when you say, all the toys are for staying here so that every time you come, every single toy is here for you to play with. That's really important because it gives them the why. And sometimes the why is helpful for a child to be able to choose to comply with the limit. So anyway, that's everything I've got, Jess. That's all of my thoughts on that scenario. I hope that it was helpful. I hope it's helpful for all of you. We will always have kids that try to smuggle things out. It's just the nature of the way it goes. I've actually shown several videos in the collective of my own kids trying to take things out of the playroom and how it was handled. So this is a universal thing that CCPTs face, and it's helpful to feel like we're equipped to manage those moments. So hope that you all found that helpful. You know how much I love you. I hope that you have a great week. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.